For a generation of Australians, the concept of ordering in was defined by a specific shade of green, later orange. Before the roads were swarmed with e-bikes and before the gig economy was a buzzword in federal parliament, there was Menulog. Founded in Sydney in 2006, it was the pioneer that dragged the local takeaway industry from the age of paper menus and phone calls into the digital era. For nearly a decade, Menulog essentially owned the online food ordering market in Australia. Their model was simple. They provided the digital storefront and the payment processing, but the restaurant handled the actual delivery. It was a low-risk, high-margin software business that acted as a digital phone book for your local Thai, Indian, or pizza place. By 2015, this Australian startup had become so successful that it attracted the attention of global capital. The British food delivery giant Just Eat acquired Menulog for $687 million. At the time of the sale, Menulog had 5,500 restaurant partners and 1.4 million active users. It was a massive victory for the local tech sector, proving that an Australian company could dominate its home turf and exit for nearly $1 billion. The executives at Just Eat likely thought they were buying a monopoly that would print money for decades. They were wrong. The ink was barely dry on the acquisition contract when the ground shifted beneath them. The aggregator model, which had served Menulog so well, was about to be rendered obsolete by a new wave of competitors. To understand the tragedy of Menulog's collapse, you first have to understand the miracle of its creation. The story starts in the Soviet Union. Leon Kamenev, the driving force behind Menulog, arrived in Australia in 1990 as a refugee from Ukraine. He didn't speak the language, he didn't have connections, and he didn't have capital. Like thousands of immigrants before him, he started at the bottom and he delivered pizzas in Sydney's suburbs at night while studying English during the day. It's a poetic irony that the man who would eventually revolutionize the Australian food delivery industry started his life here as the guy knocking on the door with a hot box. In the mid-90s, while working as a travel agent, he realized the entire system of booking hotels was archaic. It was slow, manual, and full of middlemen taking a cut. With a reported investment of just $750 to print some dodgy-looking brochures to attract Russian tourists, he started what would become Hotel Club. He bet the house on the internet before most Australians even had dial-up. The gamble paid off spectacularly. Hotel Club became a global pioneer in online accommodation. In 2004, at the height of the dot-com recovery, he sold the business to the American giant Cendant for approximately $88 million USD. He had the money to retire to a private island, but instead, he looked back at his first job, delivering pizzas, and realized that the local takeaway shop was still stuck in the Stone Age. They were still relying on paper menus stuffed in letterboxes and taking orders over a crackly landline. He saw the exact same inefficiency he had seen in travel agents, and he knew exactly how to fix it. For nearly a decade, Menulog grew in the shadows. While Silicon Valley was obsessing over Facebook and Twitter, Kamenev was slowly conquering the Australian suburbs. By 2007, they'd expanded from Sydney to Melbourne, Brisbane, and Canberra. By 2012, they were in New Zealand. They faced almost no real competition and acquired smaller rivals like Eat Now, consolidating their grip on the market. By 2015, they had 5,500 restaurant partners and 1.4 million active users. They were the undisputed kings of the aggregator model. If a restaurant in Australia did delivery, they were on Menulog. Then, in 2015, the British food delivery giant Just Eat was looking to expand, and they saw Australia as a goldmine. They looked at Menulog's numbers, its high margins, dominant market share, and low operating costs, and they opened their checkbook. The British food delivery giant Just Eat acquired Menulog for $855 million. In hindsight, the 2015 sale was the peak. Just Eat bought Menulog at the exact moment the tide was turning. They paid nearly $1 billion for a digital phone book right before Uber and DoorDash arrived to burn the book down. In 2016, Uber Eats launched in Australia, bringing with it the full force of Silicon Valley's capital and technological aggression. Unlike Menulog, which relied on restaurants having their own drivers, Uber Eats built its own logistics network. This meant that for the first time, restaurants that had never offered delivery, like high-end burger joints, trendy cafes, and fast food chains without fleets, were suddenly accessible to anyone with a smartphone. While Menulog was operating as a directory, Uber was deploying sophisticated ad tech to capture the market. By 2018, Uber Eats was running complex campaigns using Google's marketing platforms to serve dynamic banner ads. Instead of a generic order now image, they used real-time sales data and location signals to generate over 700 variations of ads, showing users the exact cuisine that was trending in their specific suburb at that specific time. This technological gap was immense. Uber Eats knew exactly what you wanted to eat before you did. The pressure only intensified in 2019 when DoorDash entered the chat. The American juggernaut chose Melbourne as its first international expansion market outside of North America, signaling their intent to conquer the region. DoorDash was aggressive, well-funded, and willing to burn cash to acquire customers. Suddenly, Menulog was fighting a war on two fronts against global giants who treated profitability as a distant, optional goal. Menulog was forced to pivot. To survive, they had to abandon their pure software model and build their own delivery network from scratch, and this transition was expensive and difficult. They were trying to catch up to the disruptors. By the early 2020s, the Australian streets were a rainbow of courier bags. You had the orange of Menulog, the black of Uber Eats, the red of DoorDash, and the teal of Deliveroo. It was a four-way battle for market share that resulted in every platform subsidizing delivery fees and offering massive discounts to win customer loyalty. However, the market simply wasn't big enough to support four major players. The first domino fell in November 2022. Deliveroo, the British-based platform that had been a major player in the premium food delivery space, suddenly collapsed into voluntary administration.
Online food delivery platform Deliveroo is closing its operations in Australia. It comes at a troubled time for the business, having left its operations in Holland only 4 weeks ago.
Deliveroo cited challenging economic conditions and admitted that they couldn't see a path to a sustainable position of leadership in the Australian market. Their exit was brutal, with riders left without work instantly and restaurants left with unpaid invoices. For Menulog, the collapse of Deliveroo in late 2022 should have been a victory lap. With the market thinning out, they seized the moment to double down and flooded the airwaves with high-production, celebrity-studded campaigns, hiring Snoop Dogg and Katy Perry to sing their jingles and embedding the "Did Somebody Say" tagline into the Australian consciousness. They were positioning themselves as the vibrant, fun, and culturally relevant alternative to the sterile utility of Uber. They also attempted to compete on morality. In a move that shocked the industry, Menulog tried to pivot away from the sham contracting model that defined the gig economy. They launched a trial to actually employ their couriers, offering benefits like superannuation, sick leave, and a minimum wage. It was a noble experiment designed to win favor with the public and the unions, positioning Menulog as the ethical choice against the ruthless efficiency of their American rivals. However, in the brutal arithmetic of platform capitalism, morality is expensive. By 2022, the math simply didn't add up. The operational costs of employing riders were significantly higher than the burn and churn model used by Uber and DoorDash. The result was catastrophic. Since 2022, Menulog posted losses exceeding $400 million. They were trapped in a cycle of high cost and low margins, trying to buy loyalty in a market where customers would switch apps for a $2 discount. As the losses mounted, the parent company's patience was evaporating. They were effectively subsidizing an Australian charity project that was hemorrhaging cash, and the stage was set for a final correction. While Menulog was struggling with its internal economics, a storm was brewing in Canberra that would change the landscape forever. The federal government, led by Labor's Workplace Relations Minister, introduced the Fair Work Legislation Amendment Bill 2023. The legislation was designed to close the loopholes that allowed companies to treat workers as independent contractors while exercising total control over their work. It introduced a new category of worker, the employee-like worker. It empowered the Fair Work Commission to set minimum standards for gig workers covering pay, penalty rates, and insurance. For the platforms, this was the nightmare scenario. Their entire business model was predicated on labor being a variable cost, something they could turn on and off like a tap. The closing loopholes laws threatened to turn that labor into a fixed cost. The industry panicked, and here's where the duopoly strength of Uber and DoorDash came into play. They had the global scale and the war chests to absorb these regulatory hits. They could afford teams of lawyers and lobbyists, and they could afford to tweak their algorithms to comply with the new minimum standards orders without breaking their banks. Menulog, already hemorrhaging $400 million, simply didn't have the runway to navigate this new, expensive regulatory environment. The government's attempt to protect workers ironically helped kill the one platform that had tried to treat them better, leaving the market to the two giants who had fought the hardest against those very protections. By 2024, the cost of living crisis had become a daily reality. Interest rates were punishing, rent was skyrocketing, and the price of groceries had decoupled from reality. In this economic climate, food delivery is the first luxury to go. When you're struggling to pay the mortgage, you don't pay a $6 delivery fee and a $4 service fee for a lukewarm pizza. The entire sector saw a contraction, but for the third place player, a contraction is fatal. In a shrinking market, users consolidate. They keep the one app that has the most restaurants and the fastest delivery times. They delete the others. Uber Eats had the market share and DoorDash had the momentum. Menulog found itself in the death zone. They were too big to be a niche specialist, but also too small to win the volume war. The challenging economic conditions cited by Deliveroo in 2022 hadn't improved, they'd metastasized. The pie was getting smaller and the two biggest kids at the table were eating everyone else's slice. The narrative of growth at all costs that had fueled the tech boom was over. The new reality was profitability or death. And Menulog, with its high operational costs and dwindling user base, was on the wrong side of that equation. On November 12th, 2025, Just Eat finally admitted defeat. After 20 years of operation, they announced that Menulog would cease trading in Australia. The date was set, November 26th.
Australian-founded food delivery company Menulog is taking its last orders, announcing that it'll cease operations later this month.
2 weeks' notice for a business that had been a household name for 2 decades. The official statement spoke of a proud history and challenging circumstances. They talked about focusing on profitability in other markets, but for the 120 head office staff who were immediately made redundant and the thousands of couriers who found out via an app notification, the money had run out. Menulog offered a voluntary payment equivalent to 4 weeks of income. But there was a catch. You only qualified if you had completed a delivery in the past 8 weeks. If you were a casual driver who had taken a break, you got nothing. In the days following the announcement, it was revealed that Menulog hadn't died per se, but it had sold its organs to the competition. In a move that raised eyebrows across the industry, Menulog entered into a commercial agreement with its arch rival, Uber Eats. The Menulog app, instead of simply displaying a closed sign, began actively redirecting users to Uber Eats in a seamless digital handover. Uber rolled out aggressive incentives to ensure the Menulog herd moved to their pen. New users migrating from Menulog were offered 50% off their first 2 orders, and for the couriers, the carrot was a $500 sign-up bonus if they switched teams. Uber effectively paid to acquire the wreckage of its competitor to ensure DoorDash didn't get a single scrap. The most critical part of this handover was happening in the regions. For years, Menulog's key differentiator was that it serviced the towns that Uber and DoorDash ignored. In many regional hubs, Menulog was the only app. When they announced the closure, these communities were facing a total delivery blackout. Uber knew this, and in their transition deal, they included a specific targeted incentive: $0 delivery fees for orders in regional Australia. Uber used the death of Menulog to finally expand its empire into the Australian bush, offering free delivery as a way to hook a demographic that previously had no choice but to use the Orange app. By the time the sun set on November 26th, the Menulog brand was effectively dead. But its user base, its drivers, and its data had been absorbed into the black and white monolith of Uber. The Big Three was now officially the Big Two, and the stage was set for a new era of pricing power and market dominance that Australian regulators had long feared. With the exit of Menulog, the Australian food delivery market has officially tipped. This is a term economists use to describe a market where one or two players become so dominant that competition effectively ceases to exist. We've moved from a healthy, albeit chaotic, three-horse race to a solidified duopoly. The combined market share of Uber Eats and DoorDash now sits at over 90%, giving two American technology giants almost total control over the food delivery market. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission has spent years warning about this exact scenario. In their digital platform services inquiry, they flagged the risks of highly concentrated markets where network effects create barriers that no new entrant can climb. It's now virtually impossible for a new Australian startup to challenge these incumbents. You can't just build a better app. You need to recruit tens of thousands of riders and sign up 50,000 restaurants just to get a seat at the table. So what does this mean for the average Australian? In the short term, you might enjoy the 50% off vouchers Uber is throwing around to capture the ex-Menulog customers, but the long-term reality is likely to be much more expensive. Experts from the University of Sydney warn that as the market consolidates, we'll see a rise in rent-seeking behavior. Rent-seeking is an economic concept where a company uses its dominance to extract more money without adding extra value. In the absence of a third competitor keeping them honest, Uber and DoorDash have little incentive to keep delivery fees low or commissions competitive. The era of the loss leader, where platforms subsidized your dinner to win your loyalty, is over. Now that they've won the war, they need to pay for the ammunition. We can expect delivery fees to creep up, service fees to become a permanent fixture, and the surge pricing model to become more aggressive during peak hours. Menulog was seen as the friendlier alternative, offering different commission structures or self-delivery options that gave venues more control. With Menulog gone, restaurants have lost their leverage. They're now locked into the terms and conditions of the duopoly. If they don't like the commission rates of Uber or DoorDash, they have nowhere else to go. They either accept the fees or they disappear. The death of Menulog marks the end of an era for Australian tech. It was a company that started in a Sydney lounge room and grew into a billion-dollar giant. It proved that we could build world-class digital infrastructure right here. But its demise proves that in the modern platform economy, being local isn't enough. You need global scale, infinite capital, and a willingness to bleed money for years to survive. We wanted convenience, and we got it. We can summon a burger to our door in 20 minutes with 3 taps on a glass screen. But the infrastructure that makes that possible is now entirely owned and operated by foreign nationals. The orange courier bags will slowly fade from our streets, replaced by more black and more red. Australia is now stuck with another duopoly. Just like our supermarkets and our airlines, our food delivery network is now a 2-horse race. The app on your phone might still ask, "Did somebody say?" But the answer is no longer Menulog. The answer is whatever the algorithm decides it is. But what do you think? Are you worried about prices going up now that Menulog's gone? Or do you think the service on Uber and DoorDash is just better anyway? Let me know in the comments section below, and I'm particularly interested to hear from anyone in regional areas. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the business of what we eat, make sure to like and subscribe for more documentaries like this one. Anyways guys, thanks for watching and stay curious.